Our next session covers something that is top of mind for a lot of advertisers. Privacy laws are changing, browsers are changing, and that's affecting the way we can track users and create personalized experiences for them. So our next panel is going to come in and give us some of their collective wisdom. So we have from Google, Steve Yap, who's the Managing Director of Technology Platforms, Abi Sachdeva, who is the Chief Technical Officer from 1-800-Flowers, and our very own Bryan Lamb, who heads up our digital analytics architecture team at InfoTrust. So gentlemen, welcome, and Steve, I'll let you take it away.
Awesome. So thank you for having me today. I'm going to skip the usual video conference. Can everyone hear me? And just assume that I'm going, or at least I just look like a talking head. But thanks again for having me. A really important topic here, and I'm excited to talk to Bryan and Abi a little bit about that in kind of our chat. But just to kind of set the stage, as you can imagine, I've had this discussion a few times with a lot of our clients, given all that's happening to the world. And just to kind of, at least get everyone on the same page as we talk about it. But before we even do that, I kind of want to set this expectation. I've been in the industry since 99. I've been with DoubleClick since 2000, and so I've seen a lot of changes in the industry. And we've had a lot of discussion topics like this in terms of how the industry is changing and evolving over time. This is unlike any other conversation I personally have ever had within the industry, right? Because what we're talking about really doesn't have any definitive timelines yet. There's no definitive solution in market yet. And there's also an awful lot of speculation. And then all of that coupled with the simple fact that it's literally changing the landscape of how many of us have gone to market makes it for a very interesting topic. So without further ado, let's talk about what's actually happening in the world today. Privacy has obviously been at the forefront of our industry, since its inception. But moreover, if you kind of look at the latest progressions, it's really kind of taken a turn to really address kind of users' overarching concerns around what data of theirs is being collected, and more importantly, how it's used. And as such, that has resulted in kind of a higher expectation, if you will, by all of the consumers in terms of, or with regards to privacy. The industry, as it always has responded in kind, and it's actually being addressed on almost two different fronts, right? So on the first front, you've got the regulatory side of it. And everyone's really famous about all of the great acronyms out there, which is all giving us fits at one time or another in terms of adjusting to them, like GDPR and the CCPA. But at some part or portion in around the world today, most countries have legislative or regulatory-based policies that actually address use and restricted use of personal data and how it's being used. And then more importantly, it's got added restrictions on, user consent and actually how that consent's obtained. The second portion of this whole thing is obviously on the platforms, which has recently been brought to the forefront. And so when you think about platform changes, you think immediately in recent context, Apple's changing on their operating systems, right? You think about Chrome's announcement about redaction of third-party cookies, right? All of which actually kind of signal kind of a bigger trend within the industry itself. And so it really comes down to three big things. There's going to be a decrease in third-party cookies and device IDs. Right? And all of that shift will now start to really shift and focus on first-party data and what actually first-party data is. Interestingly enough, I've had a lot of conversations about how do you define first-party data? And so we can talk a little bit about that probably a little bit later. The second is you're going to have more of a reliance on aggregated and anonymized measurement and results. And so if you think about modeling techniques, this is where, and Neil Hoyne was actually earlier on talking about this in terms of why machine learning is so important, right? To be able to take aggregated data and be able to actually learn from it in real time with a good degree of certainty. in confidence. And then the last one, which has been really interesting and a pretty hot topic, especially as it relates to retailers, has been this idea of the decrease in ceiling of direct observable conversions, right? And the possibility of actually the entire industry moving to more of this modeled conversion type of metric, which is very familiar in terms of the, in broadcast TV and in radio, of course. So with all of those beautiful things, we have both Bryan and Abi here. And so, Abi, I'm going to start with you. I just painted a picture, a lovely environment of somewhat nightmare proportions. Would love to kind of understand or just provide us with like an overview of how 800 Flowers actually thinking about this as the industry changes.
So first, thank you for having me, guys, out here. And as you mentioned, Steve, this is a changing world, right? It literally what's been happening 6 months ago will not be the same 6 months later. And as the policies are changing and as we're coming across with all the new terms like GDPR or CCPAs and all, we are very super careful what we are collecting, right? And how we are interacting with our customer back, right? We don't want it to be stepping away from the boundaries which we have set as the guiding principles for us when we are collecting the data, and we don't want it to get the third-party data which is not legalized or anything like that in that fashion of it or anything like that. But how we are thinking and how we are planning to do it into it is like what you mentioned about the first-party cookie data and all that kind of a thing, or first-party data. We've been working from last almost 6-8 months or more, probably like that, since the announcement of a Chrome thing happened or all those things, the policies changes happening. We've been collecting the data in our level and building our enterprise ID. Our challenge is one of the level is somewhere different. We are multi-brand also, right? We are not just one brand as a 1-800-Flowers. We consist of 12 other brands as an enterprise, right? So for us, even for our brand two, which is, let's say, Harry and David, is a third party for flowers, right? So, and when the customer browses for flowers, Harry and David could be a different way, but we need to sync it and we need to merge our customer into the same funnel and all this kind of thing. So collecting the data is very key for us in a same fashion, building an enterprise ID, which is a unique ID for every customer, not because, again, still customer love to shop as a guest user. Right, and that's where the biggest challenge comes when they cross between the brands and all this kind of a thing. But again, thinking about it, how we build our CRM, right? How we're collecting all our information regarding that, how we want to connect the customer contextual data, behavior data, and bringing back the right information to the customer instantly in a real-time basis. Previously, we used to see it from a second visit. Now we are working towards is how we can do the real-time stuff for us in that same fashion. Does it make sense?
Does. I'm trying to find the mute buttons. My apologies. Bryan, any thoughts around that as well in terms of how InfoTrust is obviously thinking about as it advises customers on kind of this new world order?
Yeah, and it's interesting. You were talking about being in more of an anonymous world than what we have been historically. I would say it's become more challenging to have first-party awareness or know an individual's identity than it has been previously. I think it's still possible. The things we have to start thinking about is there's a more increased focus on understanding. Ultimately, you're trying to get users to identify themselves, but it's a two-way street. Like there has to be value in why they're doing it, and so that's looking at that overall. What is that give and take value? Like there's reasons that we as an organization or a company are looking to do this, but also recognizing what is the value of the end user and being able to communicate why should you be doing this? Why are you allowing us to identify you? And then on top of that, with all the changing landscape, it's not just identifying you, but you were talking about the landscape of consent and being able to collect this information. All of that is being able to understand and communicate and articulate well to people why you're doing this. What is the value of it? And not just this passive, like, just please let me do this. and being able to explain to them the value for them, because there can be value for them and for us, especially in the realm of personalization. Like that's where the true value, like we're not just asking this because we want to know you. We want to know you because we want to personalize this experience for you. We want you to find value out of being a customer of ours.
And that's sorry.
No, go ahead.
And that's where the real-time personalization comes into the picture, because showing the value, because you cannot tell the customer straight away out there, but they're showing the real-time personalization that we're collecting you, but we are serving you what you wanted to serve today, right? What you're here for at that moment. And that automatically serves the purpose of it and building the ground with our customer base, in a sense of like, I built this thing now. Now, when you will be the next time you will be coming, it will be much more precise, relevant information for you. And that's how we build the trust with them.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
That's a very good point. It's one thing to say all these things about the value and why you're asking for it. It's another to make sure you're actually doing it, because you're asking for a trust relationship. And if you're not actually doing the things that you say you're going to do or what the value is, then there can be a potential like disconnect in what's going on.
Yeah, and you're both bringing up a really good point, right? Especially around, as you think about kind of the regulatory aspect that I brought up in terms of really examining how companies are obtaining consent, right? And how clear that is. Anecdotally, we do know from research that like around 70% of consumers are more than happy to provide personalized information about themselves to companies if they can increase kind of and make better the experience that they have with those particular brands. Now, I think it's, Bryan, you brought up a great point in terms of how do you end up doing that, right? Especially when it seems like the industry conditions now are set to really challenge your ability to do personalization. And so on that topic, Abi, I'll start with you again. There's obviously a balance now, right? Because I think the biggest fear about marketers is that, wow, you're going to take away my ability to kind of really target certain messages to certain individuals, given kind of the limitations and the technologies that are being suggested. And so, are we going to go back to the days of the internet with the dancing stick man on the publisher websites? But in an effort to kind of keep that personalization, no one wants to kind of put their company at risk. So, Abi, how do you think about that balance between really a consumer's want and need to interact with you on a more meaningful level, also with, all right, a lot of the stuff isn't necessarily clear between right and wrong. There's the policy, and then there's the spirit of the policy. So how do you balance that to make sure that you're keeping your company in kind of the trusted graces of the consumer?
It's not an easy answer. I don't think so. Anybody has a clear answer for that in my mind at this moment. But you're very right. As a customer, as an end customer, I like these policies, right? You cannot take my data and share it with anybody and all that and follow me along in every part of my world, wherever I go on into. Right. On the other side, from a marketing side of it, or from a business point of view, it's getting very challenging, right? The expenses wise, it's going to go a little bit higher. The marketing expense going to, because now you cannot target cleanly towards that customer and understand that and bring them back to your brand, right? But at that same time said, like, it's a trust and a brand relation. What the trust building exercise is, what the brand going to do between the customer, as that's going to help us to build it. But if you think from other point, is like at this moment also for the brands which we don't trust when we are browsing or when we're shopping with them, we do not save our credit card information. Right? That was a valid, if you think about it, the wallet information or credit card information, we do not save it. We shop it one time, we're done for all. We did it and all that stuff. This world, in my mind, how this is transforming, it's transforming to that level, right? Where the customer data, the brands you're going to trust, you're going to feel confident. I'm going to give them my information because they're going to keep it secure and they're going to serve me the best results. So the next time I'm shopping, it's a better experience for me because how I save my credit card information at this moment, right? It's the same. It's now we are increasing the level where we used to be just the credit card information. We are going with our taste, our flavor, our interest, onto what we are here for, we're taking this to that level now. Our customer is going to that level now. And that's actually good and bad. Bad for the marketing, because until they don't brand not going to break that trust with that customer, they're not going to feel confident. But ultimately, it's going to give a value, because now you're going to get a very potential customers and you're going to retain them for a longer time, right? The retention rate going to go higher with this, because now you are filtering down the noise and you're making a very one-to-one relation with a very trusted customer who actually wanted to give you their information, right? And then you take it wisely and manage it.
Yeah, I would imagine that, I think that the industry will most certainly have an easier time figuring out, how do I maintain relationships with those loyal customers, right? And the ones, with the highest lifetime value that we've identified. I think the other aspect of that is obviously prospecting, right? And and looking at that. How do you think about that kind of going forward? And are we looking at moving back to billboard-based marketing to the masses?
Kind of, yes. The expenses will be high, as I mentioned. Like, I do not know probably in my mind the expenses and a random marketing to capture the customer and giving them something will be there. The biggest challenge going to be faced by new brands, new startups, right? That's going to be the biggest challenge where we all going to face, right? Those are the things like where I'm bringing a great customer, like this is a problem I'm solving and all those kind of a thing for the customer, but how I'm going to convince my customer to trust me on that one, right? And that's where it's going to come down to. But it's going to be, I'm pretty sure it's a challenge for the CMOs and all that stuff who have to think about this to the next level. But that's where I do not know the precise answer to your question, Steve, to be true, how we can literally solve that going forward. After, let's say, iOS put their changes and all those things happen when the Apple do it, customer from a very get-go, when they're going to download an app or when they're going to come on the site, they're not going to feel confident, I'm going to share my information with you, right? If I'm new to a brand or new to stuff, I will not do that. I don't know this company. Even you have done the best PR in the world and you created the best things, but I don't know you yet. Until I don't know you yet, I'm not going to give you my information.
Yeah, and that is, I mean, I hit the nail on the head, right? Like as I kind of referred to it at the beginning, there really is no great answer right now, and I think that's also where we have the challenge in the industry. It comes with a huge opportunity, right? In terms of how do we rethink the ways and the manner in which we actually approach things like prospecting, things like how do you generate a relationship with the consumer with limited knowledge and permissions in terms of what about that individual and what they kind of want to interact with. So we touched a little bit on kind of those levers, in terms of the technology. One kind of great debate that has always kind of been prevalent within the industry, especially with the emergence of all of these technologies, has been this kind of concept about in-housing versus outsourcing. And I think that as we're shifting to kind of a more privacy-centric world, companies are going to have to rely a lot more on kind of their consumer relations and their consumer assets, right, and their consumer data, that first-party data we keep on referring to. Hey, Bryan, how do you look at it when you're thinking about kind of architecture around either buying to own and kind of in-housing it all, or in-housing portions of it and outsourcing some, or just outsourcing it all to kind of more industry experts?
Yeah, and I think part of that, it kind of leads into what you were talking about when we're talking about prospecting, and the strengthened reliance or need to really have first-party data. I think what it's all driving towards is what do I have to do to get the best understanding of the customers that I haven't met yet based on the customers that I have. It's really, I feel like we're going to see a much larger shift towards how efficient can I make my lookalike audiences or my lookalike targeting and really, really understand my customer. and what do they look like? I think companies always want to understand their customers. I think this is just going to drive that to another level because they're going to have to be operating in a bit of a vacuum where they can't target their customers the way they traditionally have. And so when we talk about the outsourcing and insourcing, I think there's going to be a bit of a shift because companies know their clients or their customers best. They have that information. I think it's going to be a little bit harder to push that out to an outsourced party to understand unless you're being very direct in what you're trying to figure out. But you're going to know your clients, your customers, you're going to know your business. And so with that, it kind of potentially shifts to more in-house because trying to onboard or upskill somebody else about your business and your customers and how they need to be targeted is a little bit more difficult. You could probably still outsource how you do that, like, from an ad perspective potentially, but the audience and the strategy of what you're doing potentially becomes more in-house because it's going to be so critical to understand what your customer is. And it is not necessarily a one model fits all. Oh, I know you're in this industry. I know what you do. I know how to target that. It's probably not going to work as well as it probably has in the past.
Yeah, I think those are great points, especially when you touched on you were hinting a little bit about the internal talent matrix, right, and skill sets, not only just the assets involved, but the people who actually need to leverage those. Abi, how do you think about that in terms of the in-housing, outsourcing, and then obviously the talent mixture, which is obviously critical?
No, I 100% agree what has been shared right now. It has to be mostly in-house, right? Because again, as this data going to be so much like a currency for a brand, right? It's a kind of a currency which they're going to use to get more and understand the customer better. And again, as these privacy laws going to keep getting more harder, you will be hesitant to share with a third party, right? Even though you go through all the DPAs and all those kind of a thing, you will still going to have some kind of a hesitance because as it's going to go, something can go wrong, right? But again, building those practices in-house where you capture the data in a more of a cleaner format, which is not, you cannot identify, but to manage your PII information, but still you have an identifier to understand who Abi is, for example, without knowing Abi last name, his information, and all those kind of a thing, but an identifier, and then capturing his browsing behavior, right, along or tackling around where he goes or what he has done it. And then if you wanted to use the data with a third party without giving any Abi's information, right, what you have shared it in that with the third, so that you can actually compute it faster than your in-house and then produce the result back faster, right, in a more of a services and all that stuff, and then show the results. That could be something we have to look into it. But like earlier in the past, companies used to just drop a pixel and then you carry along every information of that customer, including the first name, last name, and all that, blah, blah, blah. That is the world which we are changing to. We're not going to have that anymore. In next coming months, I'm not even talking years, in coming months, we're going to see that is like not going to happen. Like, because companies going to change the laws, like operating systems, a browser not going to let you do that, like literally to that extent. So those things will change. So that's why you have to have mostly your in-house team doing majority of the work. But yes, as you need it to use the talent, expose the data to them, compute it fast, bring it back in, serve to your customer.
So, with that, and I recognize we're about 6 minutes out. So if I may, do you have any, best practices, things that you're thinking about that hey, this is coming now, here are ways in which I feel we need to prepare, and things that you've already begun to leverage. And Bryan, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think the critical thing there, historically, I think companies want you to be able to provide your identity. I think it becomes even more critical, especially when you think about cross-device and the loss of third-party cookies and just wanting to be able to track things. I think whatever you can do in order to one, get that user to identify themselves with you so you can start that relationship, but also what can I do to make sure that regardless of the device they're on or how they're coming to me, I am able to recognize and know that it's the same person. Because it's one thing to get a person to create an account, but if they're not in the habit of, like, from an experience perspective, from my, I want to make sure that I'm always logged in everywhere because I want that consistent experience. And then recognizing potentially some of the efforts you're doing, are there ways that I can carry that, that identity across devices without necessarily asking that person to log in? There are engagements you make with existing customers, and how can I make sure when I'm bringing them back that I don't have to ask them again, who are you? I know who you are. I brought this experience. And it almost feeds back to that, like, doing what we promised. Like, you gave us your identity and you've given us the ability to personalize. We want to make sure that you're confident that we now know who you are and we're not asking over and over again, wait, who are you? Oh yeah, now I can do this.
Yeah. Abi, what do you think? Some any insights that you're preparing for and kind of the mindsets that you're walking into this with?
Yeah, as I said, we started walking on this journey almost a year ago, to be true. Like, in my mind, like, coming out of the sessions, if the brands are still copying and managing the sessions of our customers, like, you have to be thinking, and we came out of a session, we manage into your JWT tokens, you carry your token along, you keep the lifeline of a token for a longer time, right? Store the customer information into the local storage of the browser of the customer, so when that customer is coming back, you're serving most of the information back to that customer from their local storage. You don't even have to do all those kind of things. There's so many good practices which is meant to be done now because it's getting more critical and critical, right? So building that kind of what I was talking about, the enterprise ID, which and then stitching the profile of a customer behind the scene, right? As a customer browse with us and coming back on a second visit or a third visit or anything like that, keep stitching the profile in the background so that you know who this customer is. Every time, as you mentioned, we do not want it to say who you are again, right? Definitely. Now that's a bad experience, right? Even though if you don't want to greet that customer like this is Abi because the customer has not logged in or anything, behind the scene, you still need to know that customer, right? Literally at this moment, that's a requirement. It's not even optional nowadays, right? I don't want it, and again, like simple as that, I don't want it to serve everybody a coupon promotion code of a 20% to everybody like that. I'm going to serve it to the right person who needs to know it, not everybody, right? And that's how the company is going to manage their margins and all those kind of things too. So these are the different things. But the most important is build your tech stack in a fashion where you capture your tokens, keep your lifeline of the tokens longer as far as you can, keeping all the policies right with the browsers and the companies like Google and Apple and all those guys who's providing us the guidelines, and then keep building your CRM, CDPs, and all those kind of things to serve the customer right of that side.
Yeah, that's so thank you both. Those are I think those are really well articulated solutions and things that to give people to think about. I'll add my own that things that I've been kind of advising customers on as we head into this. So my first one is something that I've learned from my manager Sean Downey, which is you really have to enter into this space in the explorer mindset. Really have this idea of the ways in which we got here will not be the ways in which carry us forward. And so with that explorer mindset, think about innovation, think about things that you haven't done that you might have dismissed in the past that might actually be, that might be, you might be able to do in the future. Leverage what you have, right? Gordon Gekko's famous quote out of Wall Street, data is the most important commodity. Leverage all you have and protect it. And so find different ways of, in terms of collection and creating those relationships. Test, evaluate, and test again. There will be several different solutions that will show up and arise. Technology is born of challenge. And so I'm a big proponent of looking at that. And then lastly, just make sure as companies, you're always asking, as you're entering into gray area, is this the spirit of the policies and the restrictions, or is this kind of in violation of those? I really enjoyed speaking to you, and I'm going to hand it back over to Pat, maybe.